Thank you, everybody, for coming today. We're going to hear from Patrick Stewart at ETC again. And for this coffee break, we are going to be talking about lighting controls and specific practical uses of consoles in the field. Do any of these without the support of our annual sponsors, Anton Bauer, ARI, Astera, Duclos Lenses, Lightgear, Panavision, and Taylor & Taylor. Today, again, we'll hear from Patrick Stewart from ETC, who is an outreach and training specialist there. One of a very knowledgeable crew over at ETC who will talk to us about lighting control. You can see it looks good.
All right, awesome. All right, so off and running here. So I like to start off with quotes. So we can see here. Sorry, learning took that on me. Sorry. So control defined. So a means of limiting or regulating something or a switch or other device by which a machine is regulated. So we can think of switches. Switches are something that are in our lighting control lineage. So this definition is off. So a little bit about me. Started off in the repair world for a rental shop. Done some touring work. Been with ETC now for 25 years, starting in 26. The last 4 years I've been as an outreach and training specialist. So this is kind of my retirement career. As it pertains to lighting control, Ellen has been at ETC for 35 years, and most of that has been on some part, form, or fashion of our lighting controls development team. Most recently, the last 10 years, she has head up the console training efforts here in UTC. So as far as it goes with how we got to where we got with lighting control in our industry, she knows more than I have forgotten. Has forgotten more than I know. Fair. That's like. So let's talk about our objectives today. We always like to go through a historical background, kind of how we got here. We'll talk about some basic console differences because there are some differences. We'll look at some philosophies. So like how the data gets stored in the console, how the data gets played back, and how it behaves. And once we understand those philosophies, we understand why the two consoles, the kind of the basic console differences, why they behave the way they do. Y'all on my screen over here. So if I see any questions pop up, just raise your hand and I will try to alert myself. And I do have some stops within this presentation for questions. So how did we start? If you were with me last week, we started with this resistance dimming concept. This is where when power control, when the desire to do some sort of dimming control to make art, to make things look different than a light on pole, this is where we started. And this concept of resistance dimming is the precursor to the tracking console, which we'll go into in a little bit. Once you would move the handle in position, if you didn't touch it again, then it stayed. So it needed manual intervention to move. So that was what tracking was. They were very large. This next picture here shows a couple of different versions. So over on the right-hand side, you're looking at Mary Jane. Mary Jane's about 5'5". So you'd have to be pretty tall to reach that next row of switches up there. And then over on the left-hand side is a touring version of a rheostat system. Again, these were large, took up a lot of space, and required you to be right up right up and in person with high voltage. So that was concept one. Concept two is once we kind of moved into the analog days where we were separating dimmers from the control surfaces and then gaining all that extra space on the stage, we went to this preset concept. And the way the preset concept is, if you can look on your screen, you see you got a white row of sliders, and then you got a blue row of sliders, and then you got a red row of sliders. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you got some levers. And what you would do is you would go through there and you would set up a scene on the white ones, and then you would set up a scene on the blue ones. And then you crossfaded between, and made, instead of white being the one that's present, you would go to blue. If you didn't have it set in the blue scene, it would not come up. Another way to look at this is a heat that you would literally write in on those boxes what level of each slider was supposed to be. So you can imagine this concept was super easy to always have things looking the way you wanted to, but it was also very cumbersome to remember every single time that you had to do certain looks. So channel number one on your console was supposed to be at 75% in scene one, and then 75% in scene two. You would have to run the blue fader up to 75%. If you forgot, it would go to zero. So it had its pros and it had its cons, but these two concepts, preset and tracking, are the foundations for the two styles of consoles that we use. So here is a touring version of a 10-scene preset board. So the person on the left would do all the presets. The person on the right would do all the crossfades. Again, I'm an ETC employee, so I will use ETC pictures because those are the ones that I own. You can insert consoles that you use in these slides as we go through. But if we look at early preset boards, that is going to be something like the Plane and the Express, and the early LMI console, and anything that was analog. Those are all the ETC, or those are all the preset consoles. If you look at the console in the upper left-hand corner, you see you have two rows of faders. And then over on the left-hand side, you have the crossfade. And then the crossfade comes in the scene. When we evolve into the computerized lighting system, and this is where the tracking concept started to come into play. So the way the software was set up, the software would remember what you just had on, and then you would build scenes after that. It would just remember, and things would just track through. So you didn't have to completely build a whole new scene every single time. Right, that brings us to our first question. We're going to pretty much have a draft of the two basic stuff. Now let's start talking about where we use them. All right, so let's get into production stuff. So being a theater company, we'll start with theater. So theater is very tracking. So we set up a scene. The lights come up into that scene. There'll be some small modifications as that scene moves along, but the basic nuts and bolts of that lighting look stay relatively the same as you go through an entire scene. And then you'll have a fade out, and then you move on to the next scene. Theater also is very linear in that it doesn't change a lot. So once you've spent all your time programming, it is the same thing every night. Occasionally, you may jump a scene because you have a broken piece of scenery or an actor that's not present. You may skip a scene, but typically you're going from a blackout to a blackout, so there is really nothing in between. that you care about. If you are doing something like a concert, you could run up a look on your tracking console and say solos or solos. And then if you don't actually tell the console that you want to change all that information, then it tracks through. So in a live scenario that's ad lib, the tracking console will retain a lot of attributes of lights that we may or may not want it to retain. So it becomes a little more cumbersome. So let's go into live events. So this is our concerts. The themes that are very spontaneous. It may be the same song every night in sequence. It may not. But the best part about a live event and a live event sample is that it doesn't matter. We can make it up as we go along. If we're feeling something a little bit different some night, we can add something. We can try things and experiment. And the console doesn't, it will literally go from preset to preset and not retain any information. So things like this are going to be your call consoles, Randy Maze, Flying Pig, Status Q from back in the day. Any of these types of consoles do this preset inherently. They do it really well. So today's consoles have some flexibility to do it all. I say some because there is some hand-holding that is required to make a tracking console be a Q-only console and for a Q-only preset console to be a tracking console. There is some hand-holding. Those programmers out there that are super good at it know how to make the VIOS, this particular console that you're looking at, a pause console or a green. They know how to do it. There's ways to do it. It's a lot of pre-setup work. If they have that preset already done, they load up a show file and they can go into what's called busking relatively easily. So with the advent of touchscreens that they're looking at on the screen, a lot of this busking is made possible because we can quickly grab a macro or something to tell a console to release a bunch of information, give us a fresh palette to work with. All this type of stuff is really largely possible by this touchscreen. Any questions so far about the two basic worlds that we program? I would probably consider, since I haven't seen the hands up yet, I would probably consider the studio world, any of the live events as far as film work to largely fall into the preset world, where you just want to be able to run up a look and you don't want to be worrying about anything. You want to be able to change that look again without worrying about anything. But you can make a tracking console do that with submasters and such. It's just you need to know with some more terminology to So let's talk about our philosophy. We have six basic things that we want to understand and know. And once we know these six basic things, then we understand what the console is doing. We understand what it needs to do things, and we understand why it's doing what it's doing. At first, when you jump on a console and you don't understand all those concepts, and you struggle a little bit, myself included, in understanding why it's not doing what I want it to do. So let's start with the first two. High stakes precedent and last stakes precedents. So HTTP and LTP. HTTP is the simplest of the two to understand. It is whatever level is matters. So if I run up on a submaster, the front key light at 75%, and then I activate a queue, and in that queue or that preset, key lights are now at 100%, the lights are gonna go to 100%. Pretty simple. If I release that preset, take out that cue and then still have my submaster up, the lights will go down to 75% when I have the submaster set up. That's highest take. So whatever the console is being telling that channel to do, whichever is higher, that's the one that goes. LTP though is last takes present. LTP is where we want to be in our live events, in our rock concerts, in our studio scenario, where we want the console not to hold on to. Last takes means I activate a submaster and it goes to 75%. I activate the fuse and it goes to 0 or goes to 100. And then when I deactivate that cue, it goes to 0. Right? So it doesn't go back to the highest level. It just keeps going through whatever presets I call up. It doesn't hold on to anything. So our concerts, our LTP boards, our hall consoles, Granny Maze, all LTP, and our theater consoles, tracking consoles are all HTP. Let's see. All right, good. All right, so how does information get stored? So the two essential schools of thought, tracking and preset, each has their own method for how they, like I said, how they came to be. So if you left the handle up on that rheostat for several cues, that information we just got through. Pretty simple, right? Leave it up by mistake, and you didn't get a blackout. So for the tracking consoles, there are ways that we can actually tell it to never let things cut through. So we can take a tracking console and we can tell it will not be a tracking console. If you looked at cue sheets on that preset board that we talked about, saw earlier, and it didn't have the proper information, then we can just simply write down the information on there, correct it. So the next time we went through everything. Well, on one other thing about a tracking console is if you want to fix something and say it's at 75% and it really needs to be at 65%, we can tell it to be at 65%, and that information will now, since it was tracking already, it's going to track now at the new level all the way through. Whereas on a preset console, we're going to have to change it manually every single time to that new 65%. So pros and cons as you work through the two styles. You learn to take advantage of the strengths and weaknesses of each company. So what is all this really? Why do we all really care about how all this data is stored? Because we want to understand why it's playing back to it. So that is the last two terms of those original six, and that is move, fade, and state. So this subject can go on forever. It is a very long and detailed. Many people have their opinion on how all this works, but stated simply, tracking consoles are historically move fade desk because a cue contains only the move instruction, right? So when that move is instructed, it replays. And if the level is trying to change over a long period of time, and we jump to the next cue, it still continues to go. Right. So let's say we want to do a sunset or a sunrise, but we have like 10 other cues that are going to happen while that sunrise or sunset is happening. So the sunset, sunrise is going to happen over 2 minutes, let's say. The move fade desks will allow that long fade to continue to happen, even though other things are happening underneath. But a state machine or a preset console will not. It inherently does not want that to happen, so it will fight that concept. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. That's kind of like when you see that scenario play out on the two different consoles, that's when it's solidified in my head. So basically, your preset console is going to stomp on that fade and just basically interrupt it and move on to it. So now we get to see if technology is going to work for us or not. I'll do anything for you to hear my computer. If you just hear it. Anything that it does. Very. Let's see what happens. Hear stuff?
I don't, I don't hear anything.
I don't remember when. We're not doing much of it just to make this work. I'll narrate. How's that? Right, so this is a programmer who is getting very frustrated because the console is not doing what he's asking it to do. And he's going to overact because that's what actors do. Okay, so he's going through the six terms that we learned. And we're going to go and see a visual representation of what the two concepts are and how they originated. There's your resistance dimmers, and it's going to go through a scenario of how we set up different fuse. So when you move the handle up, the light's going to fade up. And when you let go of the handle, it's just going to stay there. It's not going to move until I move it back down. So that's what LTP is. So you'll see your three demos there up on the top. There's 50%, there's 50%, and channel 3 is at 0. Now I'm going to take those two to full. Because level 1, demo 1 didn't move, it stayed at 50%. So that's tracking. Only recording the moves, not doing anything for that channel number 1. Now he's showing how things can be moved at different times. So you saw how slowly he moved the third one. That's the move fade concept. So HTTP preset and state are going to be in the next. The average technician has 2 arms and a leg. That's a joke. Pictures of all kinds of resistance kits. There's your early preset board that we saw earlier. So this that you're looking at actually controls 6, 12, 24 dimmers. Okay, so it was showing which channels were at the higher level. So if you activated both those banks at the same time, it would do HTTP. So it's trying to be funny about how many fingers it takes to set up a look. Well, now we're going to look at that same thing we looked at the same thing. And so we want dimmer one to actually remain at 50 like it did before, but because he doesn't write it down, and slider number 1 is off, when he crossfaded, it actually went to 0 the first time. Hundred, 150. So that's the difference. That's the difference in the way tracking versus state works. Guys, just doing a review. So tracking, we only write down the move instructions. So because this is tracking, we don't need to write down that 1 wants to be at 50. But in a preset system, we do. So we have to write down everything. So this is telling you that again, that you get that move fade, so you get the option to have multiple things fading at different speeds. In the preset system, it does a full replace. So every time you crossfade, it's just going to go. If you want to do something long, some sort of long fade, you have to do some sort of manual intervention to make that work. Whereas the tracking console will do that inherently. All right, so that is all of that really. So that brings us to questions.
I have, I have a question. I was wondering if you've seen any impact on console technology from the prevalent use on film sets, or is it really kind of in line enough with live events that not much has changed?
I've seen a major change on the film sets that I've looked on and the ones that I supplied here to. It used to be for us, it was the Element console, which was just faders on the console. That was the go-to console for permanent installations and on location. I think it was simple. That has now shifted, and now we have we have programmers. Sorry, I don't remember the term. Their job position, but they own their own tracking element for preset console. And depending on what they feel the most comfortable looking at, or what types of shoots or studios that they look in, they'll choose a console based on that. So for us specifically, we have folks that have their own logs or have their own apexes, and we go out and work for them, and it's part of their day rate.
Mhm. We got one in the chat here, for live
So
event.
that is a very good question. Um, that is actually a very good question. It depends a lot on what the event is or what the effect is. Um, I would say just generically, a smaller production made. So the console can do both. The console can do all kinds of stuff. Um, so it's really a matter of personnel, time, and complexity of each of those, whether it's video, audio, lighting effects, lighting, face looks. If there's physical time for one person to do it all, they can do it, the console can do it. If there's not, then you're gonna get it from multiple consoles. A lot of times before things go out on any kind of tour, you may have multiple consoles to do the programming, and then you leave it to one to run the show, as it tours. Sometimes you will have those effects running on two machines all the time. Sometimes the video or the audio will tell lighting what to do. So they tell the individual consoles to do the effects. It's really, it's a potpourri of different concepts, based on, what's going on. In our demo room here in Middleton, we have audio running the lighting, just because audio was the simplest way to make it work. A couple of you, it doesn't really matter what you use. Typically, typically those systems are largely they're largely their own entity. So they're just sending BMX out to the lighting fixtures. But you can use any number of different types of interfaces to tell a traditional console to do the thing until color changing and that kind of stuff. I have seen several tours recently that the paint and tilt function is done by a human, but the color changing and the iris and any kind of effects work that light is also doing as a follow spot is done by the console. So that's all cued throughout the show. All the human is doing is just following the person around. There is now also very, very much like GPS technology where it triangulates the stage, and the lights just follow the person around because they have a transmitter on their back, on their back, on their front, on their person, on them. And the newest technology that I've seen, but haven't really seen it in heavy rotation is a camera, where the light and the software is actually looking through a camera on the light to track that person. And with that, they claim that it will be a little bit more intuitive to understand the human body as it moves, that it makes the move, almost like a human does. We see somebody lean and expect that they're going to make a movement in that direction, and we're already moving with them. Whereas the light is waiting for that transmitter to move, so it may not be as fast. We also usually have to slow those transmitter reaction times down so that the person bobbing right and left doesn't cause the light to move. Left and right is involved. But really, for the most part, our remote spot is in our what type of spot.
To bring it into kind of the rental house world, how do you prep a console before you send it out to a client? You know, what are the kind of the big factors you have to consider before doing that?
I usually want to have it right with all of the shows, unless you share shows amongst, multiple users. If it's a real console and you own it, really great for me about to yourself. You have needed to all the elements so you keep it in an account and keep it accumulated over time. So you have, um, access to anything. You can pull magic keys or key lists or effects, from previous shows forward, into a new show. But typically, if you're doing a rental house, you're gonna want it, back to default. So you're gonna want it free of any extra stuff.
All right.
Well, some other, I'll just keep something. Or within, some other kind of cool things that have happened recently, with the networking. Here, especially like the last decade, and we're getting more and more systems that are communicating on that network, to do different things. And it makes things more complex and more simple, also sometimes almost any sense at all. That you can the division of labor, the division of responsibility, for each system or for each show, now becomes a little more manageable. So you can have, with OSC, which is open source control, you can have almost anything talk to anything. That's not doing it, as you would think. It's doing it by this source command. So they, we have an architectural system and it can send a source command to the lighting console to tell it to be in a certain state. We can do that to, I mean, we can go way off the chart and we can tell a reading controller that it's time to go. So we basically give it a cue. And then the human can press the button and say, go. Once they determine it's safe. All this stuff is with source commands. Really pretty cool. And all that stuff travels across the network. So these things are all integrated with each other on the network, even though they're not actually speaking to, the device itself, say like the automated lighting fixture or the conventional lighting fixture. They're speaking to the console or the console operator, telling them what to do, and then that operator does it. And in some cases, it's telling the console what to do, and the operator isn't even doing anything other than watching them happen.
I'm not seeing any more questions pop in the chat here. Have you found that there's a major difference between programming for theater or live events and film? Maybe I sort of asked this question already, but
Definitely. And like, um, your theater folks are usually programming, in stages. So they'll go through the entire, they'll go through the entire script and kind of put the nuts and bolts in. So like stage watches and different things. They program top to bottom that way so that they at least have, a meat and potatoes on their system. And then they'll go back through and they'll kind of look at some timing. They might start labeling things. Then they'll make another task where they like really work on like the effects and different things to kind of jazz it up. So basically, if they have the time, they get to all the bells and whistles. Usually with a live event, like a concert or a one-off type of thing, you're trying to load yourself up with as many options as you can, not really knowing how it's actually going to go down. So you're either, if you're doing some sort of a music event, like an award show, you kind of know what the performers are going to be performing. So you may be loading yourself up in the head with how you might want the system to behave on a specific song. So you're loading those effects up in the console. Probably in a preset, probably going to be in the holiday of May for that. And you just build in like a bunch of toys for every song. And like I said, with the theatrical performance, the performance is gonna go Q2, especially one that's gonna go Q2 over a long period of time, so like on the tour. Um, you're gonna be doing things in a linear fashion, I mean, you're gonna go start to finish. You're gonna want to see it flow through the entire course of the production, um, so that you can leave it to play over and over and over again. Versus that live event. We kind of, we used to call live events concerts, but now for theater folks that are also considering themselves live events. So we have to be a little more precise in the word we use. A concert type environment or a live film type of environment versus a live theatrical type environment. But I mean, I've seen folks with field constantly where they're out doing the film and TV and they're using them like a concept. They have all the building necessary, they figured it all out. Very elaborate magic sheets, and they can that console do anything they want it to do. And then they can also sit down and do a bunch of things. And have it repeat itself over and over again. Well, that's an active QR code. That tells you how to get to that video if you ever if you want to see it in all of its humor, because I am not a humorist as that video was. Um,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thanks for the invite. Glad I could help. If you have any questions at all, you can just email info@eccconnect.com. We'll be happy to get to the answer during the time.